Now, in the 1930s, we really start to see things take a different turn in psychology. We start to say, you know what? If psychology is going to be a science, something has to be measurable, right? And evidence-based. And in order to really examine psychology within that realm, we have John Watson, who really was the beginning of behaviorism. He said, you know what? We need to look at something that we can measure. And what is that? It's behavior. We can measure. We can quantify responses. He says you couldn't do that with thinking, right? Like looking at a lot of Freud's work and a lot of psychology that comes before him. Remember consciousness, stuff like that. So we have John Watson, who talks about classical conditioning, really learning through acquisition. If you ever had a taste aversion, it's where you eat something, sometimes you get sick, and then you never want to eat it again. It happened to my friend Jenny with blueberry pie. But here's the other thing. Sometimes you can eat something, get sick from it, and want to eat it again. It's still your favorite thing. And that's because classical conditioning is selective. We're going to talk more about that in the coming times. But really, John Watson, fascinating man, left the university, kicked out, and went on to take psychology into the world of advertising where he made a lot of money. More on that gossip later. Then, out of Watson's work, we have operant conditioning. Looking at Edward Thorndike's law of effect, right? Saying people do things because it's purposeful, right? And we have B.F. Skinner, who emphasized that we really need to look at the overt behaviors and how they're shaped by rewards or reinforcers and punishments. Punishments always decrease behavior, theoretically, and reinforcers will increase it. And he said we could use shapers. That's another key word. You're going to see a lot of key words in psychology to help you through those questions that shape behavior, right? And they can be positive reinforcers or negative. When we talk about positive and negative, though, I don't mean good or bad. I mean adding something to the environment or taking something away. Right? So punishment, for example. Say you come home late and your parents say, you know what? I'm tired. I'm tired of waiting up for you. So they say, you know what? We're going to take away the car. You can't go out anymore. And you can't use the car. That's a negative punishment. You're taking something out of the environment to decrease the behavior. Now, on the flip side, a reinforcer increases behavior, right? So that would be positive. So if we say, okay, you came home on time, you met your curfew, we're going to let you use the car again, that would be a positive reinforcer. It's to increase the behavior. The big thing you need to remember is that reinforcers always increase behavior, right? And punishers decrease. Punishment decreases behavior. We'll get more into this. Now, we move then further away from behaviorism and look more at humanistic psychology, and this is really has a strong influence on the work that we do today in therapy. A lot of times when people think of a client-therapist relationship, they think of a very humanistic situation. Started by Abraham Maslow and then later carried on by Carl Rogers, they emphasize the current environmental influences on our growth, potential, and our need for love and acceptance in helping us to be the best people we can be. For example, Freud, he was looking at people's past. Behaviors were looking just at behavior. And then today, and in humanistic psychology, it's really looking at both and specifically looking in the future, right? How can we help people to lead better, healthier, happier, more successful lives? And humanistic psychology really looks at that. We're going to talk about the pyramid of needs. We're going to talk about client-centered therapy, helping to build self-esteem. That's another big thing for humanistic psychology is building healthy self-esteem. Now, today we define psychology as the scientific study of behavior, what we do, and the mental processes, which are the inner thoughts and feelings. So really, it's two faces of the same coin. So no longer are we in this big debate. Is it mind-body separation? Is, behavior versus thinking? We don't really have that. We look at it in terms of both. Professional organizations, psychological associations, and societies. The APA, the American Psychological Association, is the largest organization with 160,000 members worldwide, followed by the British Psychological Society. These organizations really are at the forefront of pushing research, helping to build a better profession for people within the realm of psychology, and also to look at the larger implications and benefits psychology and the study of psychology can add to creating a better society. Okay, in psychology, we talk about a couple big debates. The first one is going to be nature versus nurture. Darwin stated that nature selects those that are best enabled to survive, right? And looking at how an organism, the main goal here is to reproduce in a particular environment, and those that are able to succeed will. We talk about evolution, right? This whole nature-nurture. And the nature-nurture debate really questions how much is environment and how much is nature, right? Evolution. What role do each of those play? Today, we actually look more at an interactionist perspective because we can't really get the full picture if we just look at biology or if we just look at our social relationships and environment. It's both, right? So that's the big thing we think about today. But constantly as we go through this book, you're going to see nature-nurture perspectives. And sometimes the interactionist is the best theory to use, and in other times you have a more biological basis and a social component or some degree of that. So like we said, when we look at levels of analysis, this is also called the bio-psycho-social process, right? We look at psychology's main levels of analysis, biological influences, right? What does genetics have to do with it? Natural selection, how are your genes responding to an environment? And then we have psychological influences, how you think, cognitive processes. Cognition is thinking, by the way. And then social cultural influences, right? How do the people around us shape who we are? Current perspectives. I would like you to take some time and really look through this in your book because you're going to see these come up over and over and over again in every chapter as we go through. And I think that the better you can understand these perspectives in terms of how they try to understand people's thinking and behavior, the better off you're going to be at answering questions and putting together the pieces. We'll give you a brief overview now. We have neuroscience, right? Neurons, brain, the big thing there is, right, looking at how does the brain, how does the body work in order to shape thinking and behavior. Evolutionary perspective really takes the look at evolution, right? What are people doing, or what is the purpose behind something that links to survival, right? Then behavior genetics, that's kind of the best of both worlds. It's looking at how do our genes and our environment influence our individual differences. Psychodynamic. This is Freud. Remember, looking at how behavior springs from our unconscious drives and conflicts. Freud was always concerned with how we are trying to dealing with those two inner conflicts. Then we have behaviorism, behavioral perspective, looking at learned observable responses. Cognition is thinking. So when we look at from a cognitive perspective, we look at how do we encode, process, store, and retrieve information. Those are key words right there. You'll see those in a lot of upcoming test questions throughout this whole book. And then social cultural, which we really will hit hard in the last chapter on social psychology, but it really looks at how does behavior and thinking vary across situation, vary across culture, and how are we influenced by people around us. When it comes to psychology subfields and research, we can look at the different types of psychologists. Most psychologists work in clinical and counseling, but here are some other specific areas. The biological psychologist will really explore the link between the brain and the mind. Developmental, this is that whole womb to the tomb, right? what does lifelong development look like in terms of our thinking, our behavior, what's normative, what's expected, what's a natural progression, what's not, right? And then we have cognitive psychologists who study how we perceive, think, and solve problems. Personality, looking at our traits. Personality is all how people think, feel, and act. And if you really look at those letters, I like to say your big fat personality, right? Your feelings, your actions, your thoughts. It's kind of backwards. And then social, exploring how we view and affect one another. This is that whole how are we influenced by those around us. Here are the subfields. As you can see, most people, work in developmental and social. That's where a lot of research is. Types of psychologists for applied. Applied psychology is taking the research and using it in real life, right? So the prior slide that we just had looked at the types of psychology and types of study. Now, if you go that next step further and say, what does it look like when we're really trying to help people in the real world? We have clinical and counseling. Clinical is research, also helping to treat people, assess their problems, studying disorders. Counseling, this is something we all kind of think of when we think of a psychologist. Educational psychologists really help people in school settings. Here at our own school, we have our own school psychologist. And then we have industrial and organizational. This is a new and emerging area in psychology, but it's really growing. It looks at how psychologists can study and advise people in the workplace. Like, how can you help people be productive? What incentives can you give them? How do you create and design a physical work environment that helps tap into people's productivity and workflow? So these are all big areas in psychology where we see research, going that next step, being applied, that's the key word, in order to create new ideas that help people. Like I said, clinical and counseling is the largest area for where people hold jobs in the industry. Now, what's the difference? What is the difference between a psychiatrist, psychologist, counselor, social worker? They all have facets that have somewhat to do with psychology, but we're going to talk about what the difference is. A clinical psychologist usually has a PhD, which is a doctoral degree. They study, assess, and treat people with various types of psychotherapy. Psycho just means mind. Psyche means mind. So think of it as therapy of the mind, right? A psychiatrist, on the other hand, they're medical professionals. They're an MD, meaning they can prescribe drugs and drug therapies. They use treatments like drugs and psychotherapy to treat and diagnose patients. This you'll see in your book. It gives you some hints about how to study psychology, survey the information, create your own questions, read, review, and reflect. We're actually going to be using a lot of these principles in order to help you do successful on your AP exam.